Garrett Sinclair walked into the main lobby of Ashford Heritage Bank wearing a canvas Carhartt jacket with frayed seams at the shoulders and work boots still dusted with sawdust. The lobby was marble and chandeliers and men in black vests who stopped mid-sentence when they saw him. Elise Wren was crossing the floor after a brutal board meeting when she spotted him. She paused. Her eyes swept from his boots to his collar. She tilted her chin toward security and said, just loud enough to carry, "Who let this man into the VIP wing?" Garrett heard every word. He did not turn around. He walked straight to the transaction counter. The teller behind the counter was young 24, maybe 25. His nameplate reading Jamie, his tie knotted too tight the way new hires did when they were still trying to look older than they were. He watched Garrett approach with the careful neutrality of someone trained to smile at everyone and trust no one. Garrett set his driver's license on the marble countertop, along with a folded slip of paper bearing a trust account number. "I need to make a withdrawal," he said. $8,000. L.M. Sinclair Trust. Jamie picked up the license, glanced at the name, then at the account number. His eyes moved to the jacket, the frayed canvas, the calluses on the hand that had slid the paper forward. He typed the account number, and whatever appeared on his screen made him blink twice. He looked at Garrett again, this time longer, then reached for his desk phone. "I'm going to get my supervisor," Jamie said. "Standard procedure for trust accounts." Garrett nodded. He did not lean on the counter or shift his weight. He stood the way a man stands when he has been standing all day and has stopped noticing. The supervisor arrived in under a minute. Mrs. Linden, late 40s, silk scarf pinned at her collar, a smile that had been professionally calibrated. She did not offer her hand. She looked at the screen, then at Garrett, and her smile tightened at the edges. "Sir, are you certain this is the right institution?" she asked. "We have a branch across town that handles general consumer accounts. They might be better equipped to assist you." "This account is here," Garrett said. "I need to withdraw $8,000. His voice did not rise. It did not flatten into anything defensive. It was simply a voice stating a fact, the way someone might say the sun was out or the road was wet. Mrs. Linden's jaw tightened. Something about his calm made her posture stiffen, as though his refusal to be embarrassed was itself an act of aggression. Across the lobby, Elise had paused on her way to the elevator. She stood near a pillar, half-turned, watching the scene at the counter the way someone watches a minor disturbance from a balcony. In her mind, it was already categorized. A man in a work jacket, sawdust on his boots, trying to access a trust account in a private bank. He was out of place. The marble said so. The chandeliers said so. The jacket said the rest. She turned to her assistant, a young woman with a tablet pressed to her chest. "Handle it quickly," Elise said. "Don't let it disrupt the other clients." She stepped into the elevator without looking back. Garrett watched the elevator doors close. He did not watch with anger. There was something in his expression that was older than anger, a kind of recognition, as though he had seen that exact look on 100 different faces and had long ago stopped expecting anything else. Mrs. Linden cleared her throat. "I'm afraid we'll need additional verification from your assigned account manager before we can process this. Bank policy for trust-level accounts. Your account manager is Ruth Calloway. Is she expecting you today?" "No," Garrett said. "Is she here?" "Miss Calloway is not available at this branch today." Mrs. Linden's smile returned, thin as a paper cut. "You're welcome to come back when she's in, or we can have her contact you to schedule an appointment." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his license, folded the slip of paper back into his jacket pocket, and stepped away from the counter. He did not leave. He sat down in one of the upholstered chairs in the waiting area, pulled out his phone and called a number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He typed a short message at the bank. "Need confirmation. Call me back," and set the phone face down on his knee. The lobby moved around him. Clients in cashmere and Italian leather passed through the doors, nodded to staff, were escorted to private rooms with water in crystal glasses. No one sat next to Garrett. No one looked at him directly. He existed in the kind of space that forms around a person the room has decided does not belong. Upstairs, Elise settled into her chair and opened her laptop. The board meeting had gone badly. 2 members had questioned her quarterly projections. One had used the phrase, lack of seasoning, without quite making eye contact, and she had spent 40 minutes defending numbers she knew were correct to men who did not want a 37-year-old woman to be correct. Her shoulders were tight. Her coffee was cold. She was not in the mood for anomalies. The anomaly found her anyway. A flag appeared on her dashboard, a red marker beside a familiar account code. L.M. Sinclair Trust. Transaction denied. She stared at it. She knew this account the way a captain knows the largest cargo on the ship. $500 million, 12% of the bank's total assets under management. The account had been there for 4 years, quiet and enormous. Every transaction routed through a law firm in Hartford. She had never met the account holder. No one currently on staff had, except Ruth Calloway. Elise picked up her phone and called the floor. Who just attempted a transaction on the Sinclair Trust? Mrs. Linden's voice came through with practiced steadiness. A man came in requesting a withdrawal. He presented identification, but his appearance was inconsistent with the account profile. We declined pending verification. Inconsistent? How? A pause. He was wearing a work jacket, ma'am. Construction boots. He didn't look like a trust client. Elise closed her eyes for 2 seconds. A $500 million account had just been flagged, and the reason was a jacket. But the thought that followed was not outrage, it was suspicion. Someone walking in off the street with a trust account number, dressed like a day laborer. It felt wrong. It felt like the kind of thing that preceded a fraud investigation and a very bad headline. Keep him in the lobby, she said. Tell him we need additional identity confirmation. I'll review the file. Downstairs, 2 security guards approached Garrett's chair. They were polite. They were clear. Sir, we need you to remain here while we complete our verification process. Garrett looked up, then nodded once. He did not stand. He did not argue. He settled deeper into the chair, crossed one ankle over the other, and glanced up at the security camera mounted in the ceiling corner. His eyes held there for a moment steady, unhurried, as though he knew exactly who was watching on the other side of that lens. At the far end of the hallway behind the lobby, Howard Price stood at the glass partition. He was 58, silver at the temples, and he wore his COO title the way some men wear a military rank they earned decades ago and never stopped mentioning. He watched Garrett sitting calmly between the 2 guards. A smile crossed his face, not wide, not dramatic. The kind of smile a man allows himself when a plan is working. He turned, walked back to his office, and picked up his phone. Everything's moving in the right direction, he said, and hung up. Elise decided to go downstairs, not out of concern, out of logistics. 2 security guards flanking a man in a work jacket in the VIP lobby was a scene, and scenes were bad for the particular kind of clientele that kept accounts at Ashford Heritage Bank. She needed it resolved before the 3:15 appointment with the Brantford estate arrived. She found Garrett at the consultation table near the back of the lobby, away from the main floor. He sat with his hands resting on the table, palms down, the way someone sits when they have nothing to hide and no reason to hurry. Elise sat across from him. You're claiming to be the beneficiary of the L.M. Sinclair Trust, she said. Her voice was professional, controlled, the kind of voice that had been sharpened on conference calls until it could cut without raising its volume. Can you explain your relationship to this trust? Garrett looked at her. His eyes were gray, the color of lake water in November. I established it, he said. L.M. is my wife's name. Lillian May. He said nothing else. No elaboration. No context. Most people, in Elise's experience, filled silence the way they filled empty rooms compulsively with whatever was available. This man let the silence sit between them like a third person at the table. Her eyes dropped to his hands. She had not intended to study them, but they were on the table, and they told a story she could not reconcile with the numbers on her screen. The calluses were thick and layered, built over years, not weeks. A small cut on his right index finger was scabbed over, the kind of nick that comes from a chisel slipping on hard grain. His nails were short and clean, but the skin around them was rough, cracked at the knuckles. These were the hands of a man who built things, shelves, fences, rooms for his daughter. They were not the hands of a man who owned $500 million. The trust requires verification through the managing attorney, Elise said. Can you contact your lawyer to confirm your identity directly with us? My lawyer isn't answering, Garrett said. I need $8,000 today. The roofer is coming tomorrow morning. He said it without inflection, without appeal. He was not asking for sympathy. He was not asking for anything except what was his. Elise watched him a moment longer. Something about him unsettled her, and it was not the jacket or the boots. It was his stillness. Fraudsters talk too much. They explained. They justified. They leaned forward with aggressive sincerity. This man sat like a stone in a river, letting the current pass. But policy was policy, and the image of a CEO approving an unverified transaction on the bank's largest account, because the man across the table seemed calm, would not survive the first compliance audit. "I can't make exceptions to the verification process," she said. "Once your account manager or attorney confirms your identity, we'll process the withdrawal immediately." She stood. Garrett stood with her. He was taller than she had expected. "Thank you for your time," he said. He walked out of the bank. Autumn sunlight hit the worn canvas of his jacket as he stepped through the front doors, catching the frayed threads at the left shoulder. He stopped on the granite steps, looked back at the building once 3 stories of stone and glass, and someone else's certainty about who he was, then turned and walked down the sidewalk. The Ashford Public Library sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a brick building with tall windows and a copper roof that had gone green with age. Garrett arrived just before 5. The late afternoon light came through the west-facing windows in long amber columns, catching the dust motes above the reading tables. Nola was in her usual spot, the window seat in the children's section, though she had outgrown most of the books there 2 years ago. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her, a hardcover about Jupiter's moons propped on her knees, sneakers on the floor beside her. She did not look up when Garrett sat down. She was on a page about Ganymede and was not ready to leave it. He waited. He had learned, in the 4 years since Lillian died, that his daughter's silences were not absences. They were full. She was somewhere inside the book, swimming through facts the way her mother used to swim through music completely, with her whole self. After a minute, Nola looked up. "Dad, did you know Jupiter has 95 moons? More than the number of clients I had this week," Garrett said. Nola grinned. It was Lillian's grin, wide, sudden, gone almost as fast as it appeared. She closed the book and slid her feet into her sneakers without untying them, the way 10-year-olds do when they have decided the next thing is more interesting than the current thing. They walked home through the center of town. The maples along Prospect Street had turned gold and copper, and the deep burgundy that only comes in the last week before the leaves let go entirely. Nola walked half a step ahead, her hands moving as she talked, explaining the difference between Europa's ice crust and Enceladus's geysers. Garrett walked beside her, his head tilted down, one hand resting on her back between her shoulder blades. Elise left the bank late. She stopped at the coffee shop on Maple, and while she waited for her order, she looked through the window. Across the street, 2 figures walked in the amber glow of the street lamps. A man and a girl. The girl was talking with her hands, big gestures. The man was bent slightly, his head level with hers, one hand on her back. Elise did not recognize his face. He was turned away, just a silhouette, but she recognized the jacket, the canvas, the frayed shoulder. She stood at the counter with her coffee growing cold and watched the way he shortened himself to meet his daughter's height. In his corner office on the 2nd floor, Howard Price sat at his computer in the mostly empty building. He opened Ruth Calloway's email inbox. He had maintained administrative access for years, a holdover from the previous CEO's looser protocols that no one had thought to revoke. He found the automated notification from the Sinclair Trust flag and deleted it. Then he deleted it from the trash. Ruth was at the satellite branch, where he had sent her 2 days ago on a training assignment that did not require a senior account manager, but gave him the excuse he needed. He picked up his desk phone and called Mrs. Linden. "If the man comes back," Howard said, "call me before you call anyone else." At home, Nola was asleep by 8:30. Garrett sat at the kitchen table in the quiet that always settled over the house once her bedroom light went off. The jacket hung on the back of the chair across from him. He reached over and ran his thumb along the seam at the left shoulder, the place where the stitching had pulled apart 2 winters ago, and Lillian had re-sewn it with red thread, because red was the only color on the spool she could find that night. She had laughed about it. He had kept it. He picked up his phone and called Martin Osgood again. This time, Martin answered. The next morning, Garrett Sinclair walked back into Ashford Heritage Bank. Same jacket, same boots, same unhurried stride across the marble lobby. But this time he did not go to the counter. He walked past Mrs. Linden without looking at her, past the row of teller windows, and stopped at the reception desk near the elevator. "I'd like to see the CEO," he said. The receptionist, a young man with careful hair and an earpiece, looked at Garrett the way people look at a sentence they cannot parse. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No." "May I ask what this is regarding?" "She'll know." The receptionist called upstairs. The message relayed was short. The man from yesterday was back, requesting a direct meeting with the CEO. There was a pause on the line, the kind that contains an entire internal argument, and then Elise Wren's voice came through, clipped and cautious. "Conference room 2, second floor. I'll be there in 5 minutes." She made him wait 7. The conference room was paneled in dark oak with a long table that could seat 12. Garrett sat at one end. When Elise entered, she sat at the other and placed her hands flat on the surface. The distance was deliberate. The room was a negotiation tactic she did not realize she was deploying. Garrett reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. He slid it across the table. It traveled the length of the oak and stopped 6 inches from Elise's fingertips. She unfolded it. The letterhead read Osgood and Crane, Attorneys at Law, Hartford, Connecticut. The letter was 1 paragraph. It confirmed that Garrett Allen Sinclair was the settlor and sole beneficiary of the L.M. Sinclair Trust, account number matching the one in the bank's system. At the bottom, a direct phone number for Martin Osgood, senior partner, was written in pen. Elise read it twice, then she picked up her phone and dialed. Martin Osgood answered on the second ring. She identified herself. He confirmed everything. His voice was calm, professional, and carried the faint edge of a man who had expected this call and was not pleased it had been necessary. She hung up. She looked at Garrett. For the first time, and she would recognize this later in the privacy of her own kitchen, replaying the moment she looked at him. Not at the jacket, not at the boots or the calluses or the sawdust, at the man sitting across the room who had been sneered at in her lobby and had come back the next morning with the same steady expression, the same quiet voice, asking for the same $8,000. "I need the withdrawal process today," Garrett said. "The roofer's coming this afternoon." His voice had not changed. Not from yesterday to today. Not from the lobby to this room. Elise called the floor and authorized the transaction. Her left hand pressed the table harder than it needed to. Her right hand held the phone a fraction too tight. She knew, with the quiet arithmetic that runs beneath every moment of self-awareness, that she had sneered at a man who held $500 million in her vault. The shame had not reached her face yet. It was still somewhere behind her sternum, spreading. Garrett stood, accepted the cashier's check, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He looked at Elise and nodded once. "Thank you. Nothing more." He walked out. Elise watched the jacket disappear around the corner, the frayed shoulder catching the overhead light for one last moment before he turned. She looked at her screen. The account summary for L.M. Sinclair Trust filled the display. $500,247,000. She looked at the number, then at the doorway where he had stood. She placed both hands flat on the table and exhaled. In 2 years as CEO, Elise Wren had never been at a loss for words. She found herself at a loss for something worse, a loss for the version of herself she had believed she was. Ruth Calloway returned to the main branch on a Wednesday morning, 2 days after Howard Price had sent her to the satellite office. She was 63 and had worked at Ashford Heritage Bank for 21 years. She wore reading glasses on a chain and kept a backup of every email notification the system generated, routed to a personal folder no one else knew about because Ruth had survived 3 CEOs and 2 restructurings by trusting systems and never trusting people. The first thing she did was check her inbox. The automated flag for the Sinclair Trust transaction was missing. She checked the trash. Gone. She checked the archive, the system logs. The flag had been generated. She could see the timestamp in the audit trail, but the email had been deleted from her account. Ruth opened her backup folder. There it was. Transaction denied on L.M. Sinclair Trust. She read the log entry by entry. Withdrawal request. Denial by floor supervisor. Flag escalated to CEO dashboard. Second transaction approved the following day by CEO Authorization. The pattern was unmistakable. Garrett Sinclair had walked into this bank, been turned away, and come back. Ruth walked to the third floor and knocked on Elise Wren's door. She closed it behind her. "I need to tell you about Garrett Sinclair," Ruth said. She sat in the chair across from Elise's desk, her hands folded in her lap, her voice carrying the steadiness of a woman who has decided to say something she has kept quiet about for years. "I've confirmed his identity," Elise said. "The transaction was processed yesterday." "I know, but you don't know who he is." "Not really," Ruth told her. Garrett Sinclair had founded Sinclair Capital Partners at 29. The firm had grown into one of the most quietly powerful private equity operations on the East Coast. 5 years ago, when Ashford Heritage Bank had been 90 days from insolvency during the liquidity crisis that killed 6 regional banks in New England, it was Sinclair Capital that had purchased $30 million in bank bonds. Not publicly, not through a press release. Quietly, through a holding company that only 2 people at the bank had known about: the previous CEO, who had since retired to Maine, and Ruth, who had managed the paperwork. "He saved this bank," Ruth said, "and he did it without telling anyone." Elise did not move. Ruth continued. "After Lillian Sinclair died 4 years ago, ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 7 months, Garrett had stepped away from Sinclair Capital entirely, handed operational control to his partners, moved back to Ashford, the town where Lillian had grown up, bought a small house on Prospect Street, started doing carpentry work around town. He moved his personal assets here, $500 million, because this is where she grew up," Ruth said. "She loved this town. He keeps the money here because of her." The room was silent. Outside the window, a maple tree shed a single leaf that caught the wind and drifted down to the sidewalk below. "Why didn't he say any of this?" Elise asked. Ruth looked at her. 63 years old, 21 years at this bank, and her gaze still carried the weight of someone who had not yet learned to look away from uncomfortable truths. "What chance did you give him?" Ruth said. The silence after that sentence lasted longer than any silence Elise Wren had sat through in a boardroom. Ruth left. Elise sat alone. She looked out the window at the town, the brick storefronts, the copper rooftops going green, the sidewalks lined with trees that were letting go of everything they had held all year. She thought about the jacket, about the hands, about the voice that never changed pitch, never rose in defense, never asked for more than what it was owed. Then she opened the personnel files. She pulled the internal email logs between Ruth Calloway and Howard Price. The reassignment order was dated the same day Garrett had first walked in. Howard had sent Ruth to the satellite branch at 9:15 in the morning. Garrett had arrived at 10:40. Elise stared at the timestamps. Then she closed the file and opened another one. She was beginning to understand that what had happened in her lobby was not an accident. Elise spent the next 2 days in her office with the door closed. She told her assistant to hold all non-urgent calls. She did not tell anyone what she was doing. She started with the security footage. She watched herself cross the floor after the board meeting. She watched herself stop, frown, tilt her chin toward security. The audio was clear. Who let this man into the VIP wing? Then she watched Garrett's face. The camera caught him in profile as her voice reached him. His expression did not change. No flinch. No tightening of the jaw, just a slight shift in his eyes, a recognition, the way a man recognizes weather, not something to fight, just something that was. She moved through the rest of the recordings methodically. She found Mrs. Linden receiving a phone call at 9:52, 14 minutes before Garrett reached the counter. The call came from Howard Price's office extension. She found the floor supervisor nodding as she listened, then hanging up and adjusting her scarf, the small, unconscious gesture of a person preparing to perform. The denial had been scripted before Garrett walked through the door. Elise pulled the email deletion logs. Howard had accessed Ruth's inbox at 6:18 the previous evening, after the building was empty. He had deleted the Sinclair Trust flag and then deleted the deletion record from the standard audit trail. He had not known about Ruth's personal backup. The pattern was complete. Howard had removed the one person who would have recognized Garrett on site, pre-instructed the supervisor to deny the transaction, deleted the notification that would have alerted Ruth, and stood in the hallway, watching through the glass while it all played out. On the other side of town, Garrett stood on his front porch and watched 2 men tear the old shingles off his roof. The morning was crisp. the kind of October cold that smells like wood smoke and wet leaves. Nola came out the screen door carrying 2 glasses. "Lemonade," she said. "I made it myself. I only used 4 lemons this time so it won't make your face do the thing." Garrett took the glass. He drank it. His face did not do the thing, though it came close. He sat on the porch step with his daughter beside him and watched the roofers work. And for a few minutes, the world was exactly as small and warm as it needed to be. That afternoon, Elise drove to Prospect Street. She parked 3 houses down and did not get out of the car. She could see Garrett's house from where she sat, the small yard with its hand-built fence, the garden beds turned over for winter, the pickup truck with faded paint and a toolbox bolted to the bed. She was not sure what she had come to find, a reason why a man with $500 million lived in a 1,200-square-foot house and drove a truck older than most of her analysts. She did not find the reason, but she found the question, and the question did something to her that reasons rarely do. It made her uncertain. She remembered how he had said his wife's name, Lillian May. His voice had changed on those 2 words. Not louder, not softer exactly, gentler, as though the name was something fragile he carried in his mouth and set down carefully each time he spoke it. Elise drove back to the bank. She went to the vault level, 1 floor below the lobby, accessible only by keycard. She opened the inventory system and searched for L.M. Sinclair Trust. The trust held a safe deposit box, Box 712. Contents logged on intake, 1 sealed envelope. She did not open it. She did not have the right, and she knew it. But the intake entry read, "White envelope, hand-addressed, feminine script, name on front. Garrett." Elise stood in the vault corridor with the fluorescent lights buzzing above her and 400 steel doors lining the walls. Behind one of them was the last letter a dying woman had written to the man Elise had sneered at for his jacket. She placed her hand flat against the cold metal of Box 712 and stood there until the lights clicked off on their timer and she was alone in the dark. Elise called the leadership meeting for Thursday at 10. She sent the calendar invitation at 8:45, subject line, "Internal Audit Tier, 1 Client Protocols." Howard Price accepted at 8:51. The conference room held 7 people, 3 department heads, the chief compliance officer, the head of security, Howard Price, and Elise. She stood at the front with a laptop connected to the wall screen. She did not make small talk. She did not offer coffee. 3 days ago, she said, a Tier 1 priority client walked into this bank and was denied service. I want to walk through what happened and why. She played the security footage. The room watched Garrett enter the lobby. They watched Mrs. Linden redirect him. They watched the security guards approach his chair. They watched all of it in silence, because the footage was clear and the faces on screen were people they worked with every day. Then Elise switched to the call logs. Howard Price's extension to the floor desk, 9:52 in the morning, 48 minutes before the client arrived. She displayed the email deletion timestamps, Howard's credentials accessing Ruth Calloway's inbox, the Sinclair Trust flag removed, the trash emptied. She showed the reassignment order sending Ruth to the satellite branch, signed by Howard, dated the same morning. Howard sat 4 chairs down the table. His face had gone very still. The floor supervisor acted on instructions she received before the client arrived, Elise said. Those instructions did not come from me. They did not come from compliance. She looked directly at Howard. They came from your office. Howard straightened. Standard security protocol. The man presented without proper documentation. Given the account value, caution was appropriate. Caution would have been calling Ruth Calloway, who manages the account. You sent Ruth away. Caution would have been flagging me before the client arrived. You waited until after. Caution would have been leaving the notification in Ruth's inbox so she could follow up. You deleted it. The compliance officer was writing in her notebook without looking up. You orchestrated a service failure involving our largest account holder, Elise said. Her voice was level, precise, the voice of a woman who had spent 2 days building a case and was now laying each piece on the table with the care of a surgeon. Not because of security concerns, because you wanted the failure attached to my name. You're suspended, effective immediately, she said. Pending a formal disciplinary review, Howard stood. He gathered his phone and his portfolio. He walked to the door, and then he stopped, one hand on the frame, and turned back. You sneered at him too, Elise, he said. Don't forget that." He left. The room emptied slowly after him. Elise remained standing at the front, her hand resting on the edge of the table, looking at the now dark screen. Howard was right. He had sabotaged the process. But she had sneered. He had engineered the failure. But she had looked at a man's jacket and decided who he was before he opened his mouth. Removing Howard was the professional task. Clean, evidence-based, defensible. Facing herself was the other thing entirely. She stood in the empty conference room for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and opened the client directory. She found Garrett Sinclair's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She did not press it. Not yet. 2 days passed. Elise returned a stack of books to the Ashford Public Library on Saturday morning. She had been a member since she moved to town 3 years ago, and a detail she rarely mentioned at work, because it did not fit the image she had constructed a woman who spent her weekends reviewing spreadsheets and preparing board decks. The truth was simpler and less impressive. She read novels. She liked the quiet of the library. She liked the way the light came through the tall windows in the morning, and made the reading room feel like a place outside of time. She was sliding her returns through the drop slot when she saw the girl. Nola was in the window seat, a book about Europa propped on her knees, her ponytail starting to come loose. Elise did not approach her. She picked a table nearby and sat down with a book from the new arrivals shelf. She opened it and read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a word. After several minutes, Nola looked up. "Is that one good?" Elise glanced down at the book in her hands. She had not registered the title. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "I'm only on page 3. Nola smiled, the kind that arrives without permission. Quick, unguarded, the smile of a child who has not yet learned to calculate when to deploy one. They talked. Not long. Not about anything important. Nola told her about Europa's ice shell, about how scientists believed there might be an ocean underneath, twice the volume of all Earth's oceans combined. She told her about thermal vents on the ocean floor that might support life. "My dad's fixing our roof," Nola said, shifting topics with the effortless non-sequitur of a 10-year-old. "He says a roof is like a house's coat. You have to patch it in the right places, or it can't keep the warmth in." Elise heard the word coat and went very still. The library door opened. Garrett stood in the entrance, backlit by the October sun, scanning the room for his daughter. He found her. Then he found Elise, sitting 6 feet away. Recognition passed across his face, not surprise, not displeasure, just acknowledgement. "Miss Wren," he said. "Mr. Sinclair," she said. Nola looked between them the way children look at adults who are having a conversation with their silences instead of their words. She did not ask. She picked up her book and slipped on her sneakers. They left together, Garrett and Nola, through the front door and down the library steps. Elise stood at the window and watched them go. The jacket moved with him, the canvas catching the light the way it always did, worn, soft, lived in. She did not see a poor man's coat anymore. She saw something someone had chosen to keep when he could have replaced it 1,000 times over. She saw something that mattered more than fabric. That evening, Elise sat at her kitchen table with a sheet of plain stationery and a pen. Not her work email, not the bank's letterhead, her own paper, from the drawer beside the phone she never used for calls. She wrote a letter, by hand. Garrett found the envelope in his mailbox the next morning. White, no stamp, hand-delivered. He opened it standing on the porch, the October air cold enough to see his breath. The letter did not begin with "I apologize for any inconvenience." It did not use the word regret in its corporate sense. It said, "I looked at your coat and decided who you were before you said a single word. That was not bank procedure. That was my failure as a human being." It said she had addressed the sabotage and restructured client intake so no one would be judged by what they wore. And near the bottom, in handwriting that slowed, "I don't know why you chose to keep that coat, but I think whoever gave it to you must have been very important." Garrett read the letter twice. Then he folded it and slipped it into the chest pocket of the Carhartt jacket, the left side, where the red thread ran along the shoulder seam in a line Lillian had stitched by lamplight on a February night when the only spool she could find was the wrong color, and she had laughed about it for 10 minutes. 2 weeks later, Elise was walking through town when she saw him. Garrett was kneeling beside the library's outdoor book return. A new plank of cedar balanced on sawhorses. The old shelf had been eaten through by termites, and he was replacing the legs by hand. Nola sat on the library steps behind him, reading. She had moved on from Jupiter's moons to Saturn's rings. Elise stopped on the sidewalk. Garrett looked up. He saw her, and for the first time in every interaction they had shared the lobby, the counter, the conference room, the library. He spoke first. "Termites got the base," he said, "replacing with cedar. Should last longer," a carpenter explaining his work. But it was the first time he had opened a door between them instead of standing on his side of it. "Do you take on a lot of repair work around town?" Elise asked. "Enough to keep busy," he said. A pause. But it was a different kind of pause than the ones that had come before. The earlier silences had been walls, his patience on one side, her judgment on the other. This one was just space, the kind two people leave between them when they are not sure what comes next but are willing to find out. Nola looked up from her book. "Miss Wren, did you know Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, might have an ocean under the ice?" Elise smiled. "I've heard that. My dad says there might be fish down there." Garrett did not look up from the joint he was fitting. "I said might." Nola laughed. Elise laughed. The sound carried across the quiet street and dissolved into the autumn air, and for a moment the three of them existed in a space that had nothing to do with banks or vaults or $500 million. Garrett went back to his work. Elise stood for another moment, watching him shape the cedar with hands that could have done anything and had chosen this. Then she turned to leave. She took 3 steps and stopped. She turned back. "Mr. Sinclair, if you ever need anything from the bank, you can call me directly." She set a business card on the freshly cut shelf, the white rectangle bright against the pale wood. Garrett looked at the card. Then he looked at her. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than any of their previous exchanges, not searching, not demanding, just present. "Thank you, Miss Wren," he said. She walked away. He watched her go until she turned the corner past the hardware store. Then he picked up the card and slid it into the chest pocket of his jacket, beside the folded letter, beside the red thread. Nola did not look up from her book, but she smiled. That evening, the Carhartt jacket hung on the back of the kitchen chair where it always hung. The chest pocket was slightly heavier than it had been that morning. Inside it, a letter of apology, a business card, and a line of red thread that no one but Garrett knew the meaning of.